So how you doing?
I'm good, man. Could be worse, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah, me and my fam kind of bolted from New York City a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
We've been kind of isolated for about 3 weeks, so everyone's healthy. We found this like kind of cheap Airbnb in Pennsylvania.
Nice.
We've been holding up there. We got a couple, keyboards, piano situation. I can kind of work and, you know.
Yeah, I was doing some more research last night and this morning, just looking at all the stuff you do. I thought I was busy, and then I found your website. Uh,
Yeah, yeah.
Seems like you got a lot going on.
Uh,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. Uh, what was your first experience with music? Like, what made you decide music and go that route?
Well, I was quite a introverted child. When most of the kids wanted to go play soccer, I like to just kind of sit inside. So my parents just kind of put me at a piano, I had a Tourette syndrome, and I was just kind of an odd kid. I just didn't fit in super well. And that kind of got better as I got into high school and stuff. But, when I was a little kid, it was just a perfect thing for me to do. I like to just sit inside and just at the piano. My parents would just close the door, and I would just stay in there for a couple hours at a time. And now that I have my own kid, I can see why that was such a valuable thing.
Yeah. And at some point you decided, hey, I really love cartoons and think it'd be really cool to get a group together and just play cartoon music to cartoons playing. What
Right.
what was that thought process like?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. So I mentioned having a kid when I moved up to New York. The day after I moved, my wife told me she was pregnant, and we had she had a nice job. She's a singer. She had a great singing gig, but she was going to have to quit. I had no work at all. It was just kind of a crazy moment. But what I did have was this weird little document I keep on my computer that had all these ridiculous ideas that I've had over the years that nobody really takes seriously, and people just go like, okay, whatever. And one of them was play music from cartoons, question mark. And that was kind of the whole idea. And so I thought, I'm not going to really have the amount of time that typically a musician would have in New York, where you go out every night and you go to jam sessions and you meet people and you do all this stuff. It's going to be different. I'm going to have to be at home more and all this stuff, and that's fine. So what can I do to make things work? And so I thought, well, maybe I'll just pick one of these ideas and I'll try to gather people to me, as opposed to going out and joining other people's things, So that was it. I decided, yeah, let's do this cartoon thing.
Yeah, that's really cool. We saw you guys perform at PAE a few years back.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Okay.
I really enjoyed the performance because you guys don't only include Americanized cartoons. What's really funny though is my girlfriend, she knows a lot of Russian cartoons, so I had actually seen the one with the rabbit and the wolf that's very similar to Tom and Jerry.
Yes, totally.
But on that vein, what's your favorite cartoon that you guys get to play to that most Americans wouldn't recognize just from being on the screen?
Right. Well, it's funny you say Russian. I mean, there was, excuse me, during the Cold War, the Soviets had this kind of state animation studio, and that churned out just incredible films. And we do a couple of those, and they're just fantastic. There's a great one called Hedgehog in the Fog that we play sometimes. Then there's kind of the Russian version of The Little Mermaid, which is not as cheery as the Disney version.
Yeah.
but it's true to the original story, and we do that sometimes. And I would definitely say that whole Soviet Russian animation studio thing lies under people's radars in the States, but it's some of the most beautiful animation ever made.
That's really cool. Yeah, I enjoyed a lot of the visuals you guys had. But on that vein, what do you think that is the most beautiful cartoon you guys work with, or what's your favorite artistic representation in cartoons? Like, which cartoons have the best art?
Well, obviously, there's like the golden age of animation, right, which goes from like kind of the 1920s into the 1950s. And part of the reason that's the golden age is that there was such an emphasis on music. It was like equal parts. That's Looney Tunes, which is spelled Tunes, not Toons, because they were talking about the music so much. And so you had this period with all this just amazing stuff. And of course, the great composers, Carl Stalling, And he used a lot of music by Raymond Scott, which is another guy that we really like. And so in our show, we always have a couple of Carl Stalling numbers, a couple of Raymond Scott numbers. Those are kind of like the two people we really like the most. But in terms of just straight up something that people just after the show say, wow, that was so beautiful, I couldn't believe it or whatever, we do a contemporary piece by a Korean-American filmmaker. It's called My Moon. And it's I always say this in the show, it's so contemporary it hasn't even been released yet. They're still, I don't know what they're waiting for, but they're waiting for some thing to release it. But he lets us show it, and we do it at almost every show now. And so it's brand new, and we've kind of taken the score and recomposed it for live performance, and it's really, really beautiful.
Yeah, I'm excited to see that one. What was your favorite cartoon growing up?
Yeah, I don't have any super strong memories of what I really liked when I was a little kid.
Okay.
Certainly by the time I got, older, I liked The Simpsons the most,
Okay, yeah.
And I have a dream of doing like an all Simpsons show with my bands, because there was all that, there's so many songs and musical numbers and things that I think that we could do. I think people would just eat it up.
Right.
But in terms of my favorite character, I really like Snagglepuss from Yogi Bear. I think he's my favorite. Yeah.
Really cool. You guys are going on tour actually a lot more now from what I've seen.
Yeah.
Really exciting. Do you have any favorite places or favorite stories from being out on tour?
Well, I guess the favorite story so far is we played a show in Wisconsin. That was a lovely old theater. That's kind of our favorite. Old theater, we love that vibe. It fits us. They're usually beautiful places and all these things. And we went backstage, and someone ran up to us and said, just be careful, but wasps have taken over the green room. So if you see a bunch of wasps, just, you might want to just leave. And we haven't taken care of it yet. And I was like, oh, that's so weird. And one of the guys in the band really freaked out and was like, I don't want to be in a room with like a bunch of wasps. So we kind of got in there and we were like, oh, the wasps are just like in the corner over there. And they didn't have a lot of space for us. So we kind of put our stuff in there and stayed outside or whatever. But then when we got on stage and we were playing, a wasp got onto the lens of the projector. So it was this giant, like by the time it got to the screen, it was like an 8-foot wide wasp or whatever. And it was crawling around. And I don't think that people in the audience could tell if it was part of the cartoon or not, but it freaked me out for sure.
Feels like one of those old school horror flicks.
Yeah, totally.
What's the most challenging part about going on tour for you?
I suppose it's such a high energy show with so many elements. There's the visual element. There's the kind of Foley sound effect element. There's kind of a comedic element where I kind of tell some jokes or kind of try to steer the narrative with the audience in a certain direction. And then the music is just really hard to play. And it's not like a typical jazz concert where, if you have 3 horn players, the trumpet player takes a solo and the other horn players kind of wait around. It doesn't work that way. The guys just play all the time. And they do solo improvise and stuff, but there's rarely a moment that's more than 15 seconds where someone's not playing. Because we're trying to keep up the pace of the cartoons, Yeah. And so it's just it's a pretty overwhelming experience to play. There's just a lot of things happening. It's relentless for 2 hours, and it can be hard. It can be really draining, And so you do whatever 4 or 5 of those. By the 5th one, it can be tough. Now, if you have nice hotels and you're sleeping well, and you're not driving 7 hours before a sound check and stuff, it's fine. It's always fine. But I see how as I've toured more and more as like the band leader, I see more and more how some people get reputations or whatever of being a little afraid when they get to gigs, because you just have all these things in your mind. It just never stops.
Right. Have you ever played in a pit for a musical? Do they liken themselves to the same thing where you're just constantly going and don't really get to stop, or?
That's a good question. No one's ever asked that. I would say that part of what we're doing is the opposite of that.
Okay.
Part of the genesis of the project is how do musicians in New York, especially jazz musicians and classical musicians to an extent, how do those people make their careers and how do they make money? What do I like about that and dislike about that? And then how can I take that and just flip it upside down? So pit tends to be no one can see you. You wear all black. It's not that you're not important, but like, the actors and the dancers get all the attention. They sometimes forget who you are or that you're even there, or they never learn your name, or that's my experience doing those kind of things. It's a very unequal division of the art, So with us, it's more like, we're sitting around on tour and you maybe had a beer or two, and one of the guys says, "Oh, did you know that I can solve a Rubik's Cube really fast? Like when I was a kid, I learned to do that." And, a week later, he's doing it in the show, We're drawing attention to musicians and what they can do and how special or weird or odd or whatever these people are. And I want everyone's personality to be so, forward in this show, right? I mean, maybe I'm the one that does most of the talking and stuff, but every chance I can get for someone to do something crazy, like solve a Rubik's Cube and play saxophone at the same time, like that's what we want in the show. I think that makes it different than almost anything else out there.
Yeah, as a saxophone player, I can imagine how hard that would be.
Yeah, well, you'll have to see. You'll have to see how it's going to go. It's a really fun moment for sure.
I'm really excited for that. But on that note, what's the weirdest thing you've incorporated into your set? I've seen the Rubik's Cube. I've seen the alarm clock bit too. Your other interviews. But is there anything that just stands out as, yeah, this is weird?
Definitely the weirdest thing we do is incorporate a clown bicycle in the show. I don't always want to spill the beans on what it is, because you don't want to, I want the audience to always be one step behind us. You know what I mean? But they're engaged because they're like, where am I supposed to look? What's happening next? Like, could it get weirder or could it get more exciting or fun? And having to cart that little bicycle, which folds up. I mean, it's tiny. It's 18 inches long or something. I mean, it's this tiny little bicycle that someone rides and plays plays music on with, and having to cart that through security at the airports all the time. I think that's definitely the weirdest thing. You get the most looks and the most kind of questions about that for
sure. That makes sense.
Yeah.
When did you choose to start incorporating all these little knickknacks and paddywhacks into your set?
Yeah, well, we started just playing. I was kind of, just thinking like, here's cartoons. Here's some, here are cartoons with some really fun musical numbers or whatever, and let's just, transcribe those numbers and play them. But pretty soon I was like, I think this might be like a stage show. Maybe we could show the cartoons. We could interact with the cartoons. And so we started just little by little saying, well, how do we do that? Are you not playing right now? Maybe you could pick up a whistle or something if a character on stage does a whistle, or like, and so some of these cartoons we actually we recreate all the sound effects, and some we're able to leave sound effects and pull the music out, and we can just play music. So every number has its own little solution. So there wasn't like a single moment when we started doing it. It was just kind of like, I think the first thing we did is we wanted to do, like, I had this idea of playing every theme from every Star Wars movie in like 3 minutes, just do some like really fast, crazy, and just like go through like every Star Wars theme. And then I thought it'd be funny when we got to like the main Star Wars theme, which is kind of a obvious thing to play it on kazoos, and kind of subvert the expectation of, or what if someone is listening to it, So I think that was maybe the first thing. We're like, hey, let's like get off our main instruments and do something ridiculous. And then it kind of just like, because then I was like, oh, well, can we do like all the like laser sounds? Or like, can someone do like Darth Vader sounds during the song? Can someone do this? Can someone do that? And I realized that the guys in the band were like just super keen to it. Like they weren't like the kind of pretentious jazz musicians that were like, no, like, I went to Juilliard or whatever. I have to like play the trumpet. You have to hear me play the trumpet. Like I have this amazing thing I have to tell you with the music. These guys are like, yeah, sure. I'll like, whatever. Yeah. Solve a Rubik's Cube, play a, time an alarm clock to like something that's happening, or whatever.
Yeah, there seems to be a lot of fun that happens within this group. Did you know any of these guys prior to starting the group? Did they all know each other, or was it just you have to get the right group of misfits?
Yeah, well, I knew one guy. I knew the tenor sax player from before. We actually both worked on a cruise ship together, which was both kind of like a really great time of my life and kind of a dark time as well, as it is for a lot of musicians. But I really enjoyed elements of that job where you're showing up for work every day and working with different kind of guest artists and enormously varying level of quality. You just never knew what you're going to get. And I like, I can get bored easily in situations. And so in a musical situation, when you literally at 5 o'clock, you don't know what you're going to be performing at 8 o'clock. I really like that, because you show up for like a 5 o'clock rehearsal and you get like an hour and you have no idea. I'm stacking music this thick and it could be anything. And then you perform it at 8 o'clock and it's like, well, it's done, it's kind of the attitude you'd have. And so I really enjoyed that. That's the thing I enjoyed the most about it. And so one of the guys was in the band out there with me, and I was like, I know he would like this because he's lived through this kind of like always on your toes kind of musical situation. And then I kind of, when I said I got to New York, I didn't really know that many people. I was going to have a kid. I just was kind of reaching out, but very much reaching out like, oh, I'm thinking about this project that's different, and has these kind of elements to it or whatever. And you're kind of able to feel out people and see who might be interested in it pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's honestly, I can't imagine waking up and being you every day and getting to play cartoon music and having a group that wants to do that and just have fun.
Yeah, totally. I mean, so far it all sounds fun and game. 90% of the work is behind the scenes.
Oh,
it's
sure.
like, arranging the music. It's like dealing with venues and transportation. And like, sometimes sometimes I just sit back and I say like, man, it's been like 2 or 3 days and I haven't done any arranging or I haven't watched any cartoons. Like I'm just doing like details and like business. And it's like, this is not my forte. Like, you have to do it if you have to do it, to get to the thing. But I of course try to spend as much time on the creative side, which I think is what I'm better at. Unfortunately, my guys help me a lot, like a guy that does finances, a guy that does, social media stuff, a guy that, helps edit videos for me. Like they all chip in and help out with stuff. Cause otherwise I think it would be too much for one person, I think.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
When it comes to the arranging side of things, how much do you take an artistic liberty within rearranging some of these cartoons?
Yeah, it goes anywhere from us playing original scores note for note to me writing 100% original music for a cartoon. And there's very few things at either end. It's kind of this nebulous spot in the middle. And we kind of, we kind of look to Carl Stalling as the guy who did this. He was this composer who never wanted to write his own music. Like he always wanted to find music he could incorporate into the cartoons, to the point that the other people in the studio would say, Carl, like we have deadlines, like just write music for this. And he's like, no, there's like a bee on stage. I want like a bee song, that we can use, that's in the Warner Brothers catalog or whatever, that it's public domain, that we can incorporate because people will know the bee music, or it's more of a reference, more of an insider reference. So that's how I feel. I mean, people approach us about writing original scores for things, and it's not that I'm closed off to it, but I see so much value in taking something that is kind of already around on some level and then like recomposing it for this new situation, which I think is just as difficult as writing the music from scratch. I mean, it's a hard thing to do, and I really enjoy that. And that's what those guys did, Carl Stalling and all those crazy guys that were writing cartoon soundtracks in the 20s and 30s and 40s. That was kind of their method, and we're trying to hold on to that.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. On that vein, you also compose music that has nothing to do with cartoons. So
sometimes, yeah.
What you have a wide variety of things that you've composed too. There's something I saw that was like a string trio with a soprano, and then you have a few piano pieces as well that are more on the classical side of things. What do you enjoy composing the most? What brings you the most joy?
Oh, that's good. Thanks for that question. I actually went and got a PhD in composition and part of my training. So I've, for better or for worse, I did that at some point in my life. So I definitely have the like classical, education side of whatever. I tend to not, I'm not one of those people that just gets up in the morning and says, oh, I have ideas, I have to compose. I have to shut myself off for 6 hours and write things, which is kind of, I mean, a lot of serious composers, that's exactly how they work. You know, they're obsessed with it kind of. I kind of need like a goal, you know, like I never wrote a string quartet until someone asked me to write a string quartet. And then I went, oh, I don't have a string quartet. I should probably have one in my portfolio, you know, that kind of way. So this project is great because it keeps me challenged, because I'll just see some cartoon or someone will send some clip over or something, and that'll get me going and that'll get me motivated to write, you know, especially now that all these things get performed, you know, over and over again. It's much harder for me to write something not knowing what's going to happen to it. You know, I wouldn't call it it's easier to be like, oh yeah, this great Soviet cartoon, and I'm going to either, you know, adapt the soundtrack or recompose the soundtrack or add a bunch of new material to it, and then we're going to play it for a whole season, you know, play it 30 places or something.
Right. Sorry, I lost you for a hot second there, but I think we're good.
Okay.
So I was also doing some more research, just doing some digging, and saw that you've performed with people like My Chemical Romance, Kesha, Linkin Park. Are there any fun, interesting backstage stories from performing with those guys?
Not really. I had a band in my 20s that opened up for a bunch of those artists, and then I did a very short gig with Kesha a couple of years. It was like recently, like in her like comeback era, which was a very odd situation and it's a long story. I can tell you one story that's good in this vein though. I got this gig in New York playing piano at the Plaza, which is like a fancy hotel. And it was for a wedding ceremony, but they were late. And so it was like the wedding was starting like 7 o'clock or something. And they wanted me to play. And I was sitting in this room, and it was a huge, you know, beautiful, fancy, whatever kind of room. And there was nobody. It was just me, like not even a sound person. There was just nobody there. It was all lit. You know, I was kind of in the corner. It was dark. But the coordinator came in and said, well, you know, you're on the clock. These people are paying a ton of money. Just like play. So I was like, fine, that's whatever. So I started playing, and then this side door opens up, and Paul McCartney sticks his head in. Just of all people, you know, and he's looking around, and I hope he's looking for the music, right? Because maybe he's, I don't know, at some function and he's bored, or who knows, you know. But he sees me and he kind of waves, and so I kind of wave, and then he walks over, and so I started playing a Beatles tune, because I was like, well, might as well just go all in on this and see what happens. And then he just comes up to me and stands behind me and just gives me a little massage, and he's just talking to me, and he's like, oh, it sounds great, mate, and like, isn't this a beautiful room and all that stuff? And he's just kind of like rubbing my shoulders, and I'm playing Let It Be, you know. This goes on for a couple of minutes, and then he just wanders out. So
That's a very fun and random scenario.
Pretty random. And people are like, did you get a photo? And I was like, no, I didn't think about that at the time. I did not. I was just, I don't know. I was like, I didn't want to bug him. I don't even know. I mean, it was a scenario that was so weird. It was so outside of any kind of normal experience that you would have that I couldn't reel my brain back into, like, you know.
Well, is Paul McCartney good at giving massages? That's the real question here.
You know, he was firm, but not aggressive. You know, I guess, like I would say.
I got two more for you. I looked up a little bit of your sad sap music.
Oh, sure.
Library, and it brings me a lot of joy because I love the self-help books that kind of turn it on its head and make fun of you. So what made you decide that this is what the music world needed was hey, you suck at piano, let's figure it out? Right,
You Suck at Piano comes from it comes from the same list that the cartoonist came from, my kind of harebrained ideas list. And my wife was trying to play some piano, and she was terrible, you know, and so it kind of it got me thinking, like, you know, I've never seen like some kind of resource in music education that is hopefully helpful, but also like totally like sarcastic and like kind of mean at the same time, you know, because like piano books for adults tend to be so like kind of overly encouraging, like, oh, isn't this fun? Aren't you glad you're finally doing this after, you know, all these years and stuff? And that's not really the reality. The reality is like, oh, we make kids do this because it's really hard, and kids just do whatever you tell them, and so they sit here for 5 years. But as an adult, you sit down and try to play, and you say, I'm going to do this to myself for 5 years before I can play anything. And it's like, because people always say like, oh, kids learn faster and stuff. And I'm not really sure that's true. I think what's true is that as adults, we can like see how much time it's going to take and how hard it's going to be. Whereas kids, you just send them to school for years and years and years, and they don't really question it. They just get up and go to school. Go to school. 5 years into school, they're in like 3rd grade. You know what I mean? Like they just go and go. So that's kind of the idea behind You Suck at Piano, is just kind of make it kind of mean. And so I put in some cocktail recipes, just kind of drown your frustrations, and comic strips about how great composers died horrible deaths and like stuff like that. And so now there's like five books in the little Sad Sap publishing world. And I'm taking a break this year because I did a lot last year, and I have so much cartoon stuff this year to do. So I just need to take a break.
Do you have anything else on that little crazy idea list that you think, oh, this might be the next one?
Yeah, that's good. I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot, actually. I keep thinking, well, maybe I'll end up with a little more free time. And now I'm like, kind of self-quarantined. So you'd think that those things, but no, I mean, I have so much cartoon stuff to do, and I don't know when the next thing from that list will come to light. And honestly, I'm not really sure. There's nothing super obvious either to me. But I'm also not actively thinking about, the list so much right now. But yeah, it would be great to have another thing. I did shoot a pilot for a gardening TV show with a friend of mine, and that was on the list. And that I think has some potential, like a little YouTube gardening show, Yeah. But the amount of effort it would take to really do it is beyond what I have time for, unfortunately.
Well, and it's nice that you have some of these projects that are really, really doing well to the point where you can do every project that's on that list.
I know, it's true. I know. It's great that the first 2 things I picked from that list about when I had the kid and stuff have blossomed well. Yeah, no complaints from me about that. It's good to have those successes, So yeah, I would love to develop a couple more things, but yeah, I don't know if it's going to happen.
And the last thing I have for you is, do you have a I've made it moment that's already happened in your life where maybe you were looking at a standing ovation, or it was the first check you got from your books that you were like, wow, I'm actually really doing this?
To me, it's such a career in music is just such a journey, like it never feels stable. It never feels complete, so no, I don't think I've ever had that. I mean, I'll look back on things and say, oh, wow, that was a really great moment, but maybe I didn't appreciate it at the time because I was freaking out about 10 other things that had to get done. I mean, I always tell people that like to be a successful musician in the 21st century, you're an entrepreneur these days, and the product is yourself, and that's attitude. It's not like, when you go to like music school and college, they focus on like, oh, well, what do you play? French horn. Well, we'll give you a lot of French horn lessons. And it's like, well, that doesn't do anything for you really when you get out. What do you get? How are you going to, there's no jobs, and there's a ton of people coming out of school with French horn degrees. Like, what's the point of that? Like people need to be taught that like, no, you're actually you're the product, you have to sell yourself and make yourself valuable to people. And so with that attitude in mind, you're never done, it's always more and more and more. And like things are going well with the cartoonists, and we have lots of gigs coming up, and that's great. But I have to look a couple of years out and say like, well, what are people gonna want? I mean, we just did a great gig in Florida about a month ago, and I was talking to the guy that hired us, and he said, oh, it's so fun. And he's like, well, can you come back next year with like a totally new show? And it was like, oh my gosh, we just got this one together. What more do you want from me, man? Like, this is so much work, So it's like, I have to be able to say, well, yeah, actually we have a couple of the things that, we could come back with. So it's like, it's just this ongoing kind of research and development phase.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Joel, thank you for your time. Is there anything else you want to say we're excited to have you in July, you and the group. Is there anything else you want to say to our patrons or anyone else who might have stumbled upon this interview?
Yeah, well, 2 things. The one thing I'd like to say to everybody is to really think of this as a concert for everybody. And I say everybody and not all ages, because all ages has kind of a stigma of it's like for children. And it is for children, but it's also for adults. It's for the older generation. You know, everybody knows these cartoons. Everybody has some sense of jazz as an American art form, even if you don't listen to a lot of jazz. And we're presenting the music in very accessible way, with humor, with video. And, you know, I don't want anyone to look at this and say, well, I don't really listen to jazz, this isn't for me. You know, because that is a very common problem that jazz musicians run into. This is not like that at all. This is, sure, it's a jazz concert, but you get the energy and the excitement and the kind of connection that you have that's just part of our culture, without the kind of maybe like, oh, here's a drummer who's going to take a drum solo for like 4 minutes, and you're like, what the heck is going on stage, you know, kind of thing. And sure, I love that, right? But I know that not everybody loves that. So, you know, I want everyone to, you know, this is how we try to market the concert, is that it is truly for all generations, and it's really great to see grandparents bring their grandkids, and everyone enjoys the show equally.
Yeah. Well, we're happy to have you guys in July.
Great. Yeah. Sounds good. Thanks so much for taking the time.
Yeah, of course. No, thank you. Bye.
Yeah. All right, man. See you.